In today's video, you can build this 10-inch long-range FPV drone. Guys, welcome back to the Drone Camps channel. I'm Justin Davis, almost 10 years now, 190,000 subscribers and over 40 million views. And today is our first 10-inch FPV drone build. We're gonna build this one with all the top components in the world on here. We're gonna do a F722 flight controller, 10-inch props, large series Zing style motors. I'm going to put the links down below for those as well, and all the build components you might need. We're going to put GPS on here, show you how to wire that up, as well as some TBS Crossfire. And the motors we're using today are just an example, but the motors listed below will be the ones you want to use for this build. Now, if you already built a 10-inch FPV drone and you need help with PID tuning it, we have PID tune available for a 10-inch FPV drone. If you check out the link down below, you'll see Drone Camp's Discord. Log into Discord, sign up in our Drone Camp server, and once you do that, become a subscriber and you get access to our PID Tune archives. Once you get in there, you can download the CLI dump that you want for whatever quad you're looking for. If you don't see the one there that you're looking for, just ask me and I'll try to get it for you. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the build video. If you're building along with this video and you already have ordered your components from the links down below, enjoy and make sure you take your time during this build and make sure everything is absolutely right. And please do, by all means, grab one of these. Make sure that you're using a smoke stopper for all of your builds from large to small. This one has an XT60 on here. We're going to plug that in. If the light bulb comes on, that means you have a short somewhere in your build and that you need to check out your wiring. So very important to go slow and take your time on this build and make sure everything is absolutely right, because this is one big quad and very powerful. Not a beginner video by any means. This is a very large size quad and it is a lot of fun to fly. I can't recommend 10-inch enough. If you've flown one before, you know they're like the ultimate mountain surfers or cruisers. So if you want to do long-range FPV, we're going to show you how in today's video. Here we go. The electronics we're going to use today for this 10-inch build are pretty simple. They're 5 different components: the motors, the receiver, the ESCs, the flight controller, the camera, and the VTX, as well as the GPS. The tools we're going to be using today are pretty simple. You want a soldering iron set. I'll put links down below to all the tools you need for this build. We're also going to use a tip cleaner. We're going to have some 60/40 solder. We're going to have some blue Loctite, a good driver set, as well as some helping hands. Some additional tools for this build you might want to consider are a smoke stopper. You plug this into your battery terminal on your quad and you plug a battery in here. If it lights up and gives you a full light, that means that you have a short somewhere and that you need to really go over your quad build and make sure that no bridged tabs of solder are happening or no connections are touching each other. Very important that you use a smoke stopper for your build. You can also get solder suckers. This is a solder remover tool. You just push this down like that, push the button, and pop, it pulls the solder out up into here. It's kind of a nice little tool to have. We also have tweezers, which are great for holding wires and putting into place while you're making solder joints. Also some various sizes of zip ties, large and small ones, and also some 3M VHB, which I love. This is great for putting down receivers and holding down GPS and things like that. Now, step one is you want to go ahead and tin all of your ESC terminals. Your pads need to have a nice amount of solder on here, and just go ahead and kind of literally put this solder on, the 60/40 solder, let it flow, and stop when you see that you covered the entire pad. Kind of just move your soldering iron around. You can go back and redo this as well. We're also going to put a link down below for a solder remover. This will help you if you kind of mess up. Make sure that you don't bridge any of the tabs during your tinning of your tabs. Just take your time, move that soldering tip around, and make sure everything is nice and shiny. It's always good to have a fan on too while you're soldering. You don't really want to breathe these fumes. Now these are the battery terminals, and we're just going to go all the way around here. The battery terminals may take a little bit longer to get heat to them, but be very careful that you don't put heat for very too long on these tabs, because what will happen is you will have tab separation from the PCB, and that will pretty much destroy your ESC. So be very careful on how long you hold the iron down on these tabs. Once you're done with all your tabs, they should be nice and shiny, and now we can move on to the next step. This step, we're going to solder up the XT60 battery connector to the ESCs. You need to make sure that you solder the red to the positive tab here and the black to the negative tab on this side. So for this step, we're going to go ahead and solder on these wires to the battery tab terminals here. You want to make sure, again, that you identify the positive here and the negative here. And what I like to do is I like to heat up the wire first, go ahead and get that nice and tinned up, just kind of spread the solder around on the wire. This is really thick gauge wire, so it will take some time to heat up, but what you want to look for is you want to look for the solder to start to kind of bubble up and just really start to flow on that wire. When that wire gets nice and hot and you start to see that solder flow all around the wire, then you can go ahead and start to join the two. Just go ahead and keep your soldering iron moving. I have a little bit of fray there, so I want to tidy that up, and I'm going to come back in and I'm going to try to get the soldering iron touching the wire itself and the tab at the same time from the side here. So once you get a nice good flow between the two, you can let go and you should be done with your solder. Okay guys, we're going to come in for this negative wire now. And again, I like to heat up the wire first. Just going to give it a general kind of reheating here. And once I see that that solder starts to flow, I'm going to drop it down to the tab. Kind of get your iron sideways a little bit, making contact with the tab and the wire. And you can bring in a little more solder if you need to, kind of keep this thing flowing, because solder helps kind of contribute to the heating factor. It spreads the heat around to the wire and the terminal. And when we feel it touch down nice and firm, we're going to go ahead and remove the soldering iron. And I went ahead and redid that one. I didn't like the way it looked, so if it's kind of high up above the terminal, you want to make sure it's kind of sitting flat. Give it a tug. It should be nice and firm. Your solder should look nice and shiny. And now we can move on to soldering up the motors. Now you're ready to solder up the motors. For this step, we're going to go ahead and grab a motor. And what you want to do is tin up these three wires coming from the motor. We're going to put these on M1, that's motor 1, 1, 2, 3, just like this. And it doesn't matter the order right now because you're going to set that up in BL Heli later. That's BL Heli 32 configurator. Now for the next part, the next motor will go here on the top tab. The top three here, it says M2. And again, it doesn't matter the order, just 1, 2, 3 there. And then we're going to go around the side as well, M3 and M4 there. And again, we're just going to kind of quickly put some solder to these and tin these wires up, 1, 2, and 3. Once you see that solder start to flow, you can kind of just remove the iron. Now go ahead and clean your tip again, and you can solder down the first wire here. I like to heat up the wire first again. Drop that down until you feel it touch the tab. And I like to kind of pull the iron away from the solder joint here. So just going to get that down and pull back. That way we're not putting any solder directly toward these MOSFETs. We don't want to do that. So we're going to go ahead and grab a little more solder here. Let's heat up this next one. And just kind of heat up the wire first, drop it down, pull your iron back that direction. And that one's done. We're going to do the next one. You're going to repeat this process for the next 3 motors. Again, go ahead and add a little bit of solder here. We're just going to heat up this wire, and we're going to connect it to the 3rd motor terminal there. And that is your motor number 1. Let's go ahead and pull back. It should be good. And if you don't like the way stuff looks, you can always do it over. But don't hold the iron there for too long because you will separate these tabs from the ESCs. Okay, and I'll show you the next motor wire here. Just go up to the next tab there. Make sure everything is nice and hot and flowy. And when you feel everything is nicely heated up, just go ahead and pull over and away, just like that. You have that wire done. Now let's go ahead and heat up this next wire. It's looking good. Put it down on the tab, heating up both the wire and the terminal. Pull it back away from yourself. Looking good. Now this last and final wire, I'm going to go ahead and put a little more. Kind of clean off your tip at this point if you want to. Between every wire if you like. Now I'm going to go ahead and heat that up. We're going to pull back once everything starts to flow. Should have a nice shiny solder there. Looking good. Now we can do the other side. Okay, we're coming in on motor 3 now. And again, just let that solder flow. Pull back away from the ESCs. And the next one. And sometimes I can get away with doing 2 wires without having to clean the soldering iron and applying more. But now on this third one, I'm going to go ahead and clean it. I'm going to reapply some solder. I'm going to heat up that wire first, and then I'm going to bring it down and make a connection with the tab. So pull away from the flight control, or the ESCs there. And now we have motor 3 wired up. Now next is motor 4. Okay, now motor number 4. It's been pretty simple so far, right? Now go ahead and pull away from the ESCs here. You never want to pull your iron toward these MOSFET. So go ahead and pull away that direction. And again, I'm going to go ahead and clean the tip, and we're going to get some new solder here. Just a little bit will do you. So I'm going to let that heat get distributed between the wire and the tab. Now we're going to go ahead and pull away again. And again, if you don't like something, you can start over. But that's looking good. Now we can move on to the next step. So now for this step, you're ready to go ahead and put your ESCs on your frame and install your motors to the arms. You want to make sure that the bolts that you're using don't go through too far and touch the bottom of the coils on the motor. This will destroy the motor as soon as you plug it in. So you want to make sure that these come up enough through the bottom of this frame that you have a solid connection. But the first thing you want to do is add a little bit of Loctite. Go ahead and shake up your Loctite and coat the end of this bolt with a tiny bit of blue Loctite. Let's go ahead and kind of rub it in with your fingers. Take your M3 driver and go ahead and run your first bolt up through the frame, just like this. Okay. Now seat your motor so that your motor collar is not rubbing on the frame. That's going to be super important for this build. We don't want any tension on the bottom of this motor. Now once you feel it kind of just get a little bit snug, go ahead and stop and take some blue Loctite, get your next bolt here. And the reason that we're going to stop right now is because at this point you're going to line up that collar with the bottom of the hole through this frame. There's a center hole here for this collar to rotate. And we're going to just move this motor just a little bit slightly so we can start to screw that through, and just give it a visual inspection to make sure these bolts are not touching any of these copper coils inside this motor. And I can see that these are a nice length and they'll match up nicely. Now you can go ahead and do the other 2 bolts, and again double check right here that this is not going to rub. And this one doesn't actually have like a collar pin, it has a bolt, so we're good there. It's an M3 bolt that's holding this shaft on the motor. Now it looks pretty good. Now we're going to go ahead and do the other motors. Now for this step, we're going to go ahead and install the capacitor on the back, and this is going to be important. You want to pay attention to the negative side, and this will be the positive side. So we're going to go ahead and take some 60/40 solder, and we're just going to go ahead and kind of tin these up a little bit here, just like you would a wire. Just get a little bit of solder on these and let it heat up. And we're just preparing these for soldering them down to the battery terminal. So I'm going to flip this around, and we're going to come in on this negative. We're going to do the negative side first, just to hold down your iron. Apply some solder to the top of that big wire. We don't need to heat the whole thing up. We're just going to do the very top there, and we're going to pull away. Now that's connected. Same thing for positive side. Just reach that over to the other side. Bring some solder in. You don't need a lot. And you're going to give that a tug to make sure that's nice and firm. Give it a second before you pull on it. And now it should be good. Now you have your solder done for your capacitor. Now at this point, you're ready to mount your stack. We're going to go ahead and grab these longer bolts that came with your flight controller. You're going to run them up through the bottom of the frame, and we're going to connect the ESC harness to the flight controller to power it as well. So that will be in the very front of the flight controller. If you look at this flight controller, you'll see that there's a little tiny arrow pointing this direction. That means that this is the way that this goes. So that will be the front of the quad, this will be the back, the right, and the left. So go ahead and flip your frame over and put the first bolt through. And this is the 30 by 30 configuration. If it doesn't go all the way through, go ahead and take your driver and just kind of push it through. Grab your next bolt, do the same thing. It should drop in like that. And the next bolt, and the next bolt. Now we have 4 here. And we're going to put it on its side, and we're going to slide the ESCs down. Put your hand on the bottom, kind of holding these so they don't drop out. And we're just going to go ahead and slide it right down. And if they don't all go through, just go ahead and take your driver and push them through. And when you're putting these rubber grommets through your ESCs, it always helps to kind of use a driver to kind of just help push these grommets through. So we're just going to flip this over, grab a driver, and just kind of wiggle your driver until it comes through that rubber grommet on the other side. Do the same for the next one. Just hold down that ESC with your hand. And then once they're all seated, they should be flush with the frame, and they should look something like that. Now it's time to go ahead and grab your ESC harness, and this is all the motor's power that will tell the flight controller what speed they're at through the ESC. So we're going to go ahead now. Once that's in, this is pinned up, by the way. You can look with a magnifying glass and just see. Make sure you don't plug that in wrong because you could damage your harness. So I'm going to go ahead and slide this on top, and probably be better before we do to just go ahead and plug it in. It's kind of a short harness here, and they should be lined up and ready to go. Hopefully you have enough length there to do that. Yeah. If one of your bolts slips backwards a little bit, just go ahead and flip it over again. Grab your M3 driver and just kind of push those gently into place until they're all the way flush with the frame. Now flip it over again and make sure that your flight controller is nice and level. And it's not touching any metal components down below, including back here where your VBAT is. If you see that anything is touching here, like these 2 wires, this looks a little bit close, I'm going to go ahead and grab some extra standoffs and put in between there just to raise this up a little bit, because you definitely don't want this flight controller touching any metal components down here where your power distribution is in your ESCs. Now for clearance, you can use plastic standoffs here, or you can also use these silicone ones. I kind of like the silicone ones because they offer a little more dampening to the frame, and any more dampening you can get to your flight controller is going to help you out on these larger quads. 10-inch props can be quite a bit to PID tune. Also, if you're looking for a 10-inch PID tune, we do have that available on our Discord. If you go into our PID archives, if you're a subscriber on our Discord, you can get to that now because I'm offering all my custom PID tunes on our Discord channel. That's like $2.99 a month, but you get access to all the different PID tunes that we've done, and you'll see a bunch of new stuff coming in all the time. So if you buy a new quad, you can look for that CLI dump or that PID tune directly from Drone Camps. So here we go. That's looking good there. We can plug in the flight controller harness and mount the flight controller. Go ahead and take your plastic nuts and go ahead and screw those down on the very top. Just kind of hand tighten them for now. We'll come from the bottom with the M3 driver and we'll tighten these bolts up to these nuts and make sure everything's nice and secure. We also want to look around to make sure that there's no metal to metal connection there. We're also going to use a smoke stopper for the first time when we plug this in to make sure that all of our solders are correct and that we don't have any shorts. That way you won't fry your flight controller or your ESC or even your motors. That happens. And this is what a smoke stopper looks like, one of these guys here. And now we're going to go ahead and plug in the ESC harness to the flight controller. And we should be ready to move on to the next step here. Just want to make sure that's nice and snug. That looks pretty good there. Perfect. So guys, at this point, go ahead and pat yourself on the back. You've done the hardest part of this build. Now comes the fun part, soldering up the receiver, the GPS, and hooking up the DJI 03. Now you can literally use any VTX with this setup, and that means video transmission module. We're using the 03 because this one fits right in this TPU mount here. I already have my standoffs pushed into here and ready to go. My hardware is sitting over here to the left, but what I want you to do first is run this wire underneath here to make it nice and tidy, and this will power the 03. We're going to run the camera up front here and just kind of place it over top of the flight controller for now. We're going to bend this capacitor down a little bit, and I believe this was pins up. We're going to put this red wire all the way over to the right here, and we're going to go ahead and plug that in. And that will power our 03. We're going to bring this up and out of the way there. So let's go ahead and bend your capacitor up, and we're going to set this down just like that. And now we'll bring those M3 bolts up through the bottom of the frame and secure the VTX into place. Now I've got my M3 driver. I'm just kind of running it up through the bottom of the frame here, connecting with this standoff right here. And you can put a little bit of Loctite on this if you want. It's a good idea to just kind of thoroughly check these bolts regularly before you take off. That way you don't have any loose bolts on your frame. It's super important with larger style aircraft and even the smaller ones. Okay, so now you're ready to mount your GPS and your antenna on the back. This TPU mount right here is a little bit large for my GPS. I'm just going to kind of VHB that down and maybe just do a little zip tie or two through here to make sure everything's held down nice and properly. I also kind of cheated here and I just snipped through here, and we're going to mount this straight through here. So we're just going to push it straight through there. I was a bad boy by doing that, but if you want to do that, you can. Otherwise, you can take these two wires off here and reinstall them. But this is the quick way, and that's going to close right up, and we can have this standing as tall as we want there. So we're going to go ahead and seat this by pushing it through and down on top of these standoffs. And what I did was I went ahead and ran my GPS wire underneath this TPU mount for the VTX. That way we can come out here, go around the VBAT wires, and solder down the GPS wires to the flight controller. And our DJI antenna will come out here. That's looking pretty good. So now you're ready to go ahead and tin up the tabs for your GPS, and these are going to be on this rail right here, this lower rail. You're going to see a few different things here. You're going to see SCL, which is here. You're going to see SDA, SCL, 5 volt, and ground. So we're going to go ahead and tin up those 4. And if you get no satellite packets inside Betaflight, a good tip is to reverse the SDA and SCL wires. That way you have proper signal. When you see packets start flowing in Betaflight in the GPS tab, that's when you know you have it soldered up correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the yellow wire to the SDA terminal here, and we're going to do the white wire to the SCL terminal. So this is SDA right here. We're just going to put the soldering pin down and pull away. Let it stop smoking for a second. Give it a tug and it should be good. Now the next wire, if I was doing this super tidy, I'd come in from the inside and around. But just for quick video purposes here, we're doing it like this. So again, you want to use a magnifying glass and inspect that there's no solder bridging over to the next tab, because that will also create a problem where you won't have any packets coming from your GPS. Now we're going to go ahead and do the 5 volt tab there and pull away. And it only takes a moment to get these to seat. That's looking pretty good there. And again, I can double check my work with a magnifying glass or something that will give you a little, you can use your phone also. I do that sometimes. Just zoom in, take a picture, and then study these terminals to make sure that no solder is bridging. So now your GPS is wired up. And we can tidy up this wire here as well. We'll tuck this inside the frame. Okay, so now you're ready to solder up your TBS Crossfire receiver, and this has 4 wires on here. We're going to solder it up to TX5 and RX5. Those are the signal wires. Those are going to be white and yellow, the 5 volt and the ground here. But first we're going to start again on this yellow wire. We're going to go ahead and tin up the tab first, and it's pretty hard to see, but again, you can use a magnifying glass or something to help you see a little better if you need. Just go ahead and make that nice and shiny, clean off the tip again, and we're going to do the RX5 tab right next to it. I kind of like this flight controller because it has holes through, so you can stick the wire through if you want to. We're going to go ahead and start with the yellow one again. If you see that you're not getting any stick movement in Betaflight, switch these 2 wires. I've had this problem before with Crossfire, and a lot of times when I don't see sticks moving and I have everything set up in the ports right, I've selected port number 5 there, and I've turned on serial RX, and in the receiver tab I'm still getting nothing. I switch these 2 wires and voila, things start working. So that's the first 2 signal wires for the Crossfire. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the 5 volt next. So you're going to skip over this one and go to the next one down. That's the 5 volt there. And then the ground is here, right next to your GPS wires. Go ahead and grab the 5 volt wire first. And you can use tweezers if you want to, but a lot of times I just use my fingers. So we're going to go ahead, hold that nice and still, pull away, let it sit. That should be good. And again, use a smoke stopper and a magnifying glass to check that you have no bridged solder. That means solder connecting 2 tabs side by side. So now you have soldered up your receiver for Crossfire. So now go ahead and grab some 3M VHB. I love this stuff. Cut a little strip of it, put it on the back side of your Crossfire receiver and stick it down to the frame, or you can add it underneath this fancy little piece of TPU here, but I decided not to do that for mine, and I just went ahead and put it there, and I put the antenna on the bottom of the quad, so that's in a horizontal fashion, just like this. Use 2 zip ties there, and now I'm good to go with my receiver. Now we can install the camera. Now for this, you're going to go ahead and switch out your driver to the M2 driver. Go ahead and take one of your bolts and get it ready on the end of your driver and just kind of set that to the side. We're going to grab this DJI camera. Make sure that your DJI logo faces upward when you put this on, because if you have it flipped the other way, it'll be upside down. So the wire should be facing down there, just like that. And we go ahead and grab the side plate. We'll put it on this side of the camera, and we're going to go ahead and drive a bolt through. Just make sure that this is the right way up. You should have a hole through just like this for using this frame in this build, and we're just going to use 1 bolt here. It also helps to use a little bit of silicone dampening. If you have some, it will really help out with this build, making this jello free. And we'll try to work on the tune specifically for this frame and this flight controller setup. If you guys would like us to, just let us know down in the comments down below. And just go ahead and lightly screw that into the side of the camera. You don't have to over tighten at this point because we're going to kind of adjust the tilt. So go ahead and drop that down into the frame, that slot right there. And I'll go ahead and grab your other piece and put it on the side. Make sure that slot is facing up. And we're going to drop this down in here. And now we're going to grab the next bolt. And we're going to drive that through into the camera. And at this point, you're pretty much just going to tidy up some wires, and you're just about done with your first 10-inch build. Now you're at the point where you pretty much built your first 10-inch drone, and you've done all your soldering. You've hooked up your VTX back there. You've also hooked up the GPS. We're going to take an additional piece of VHB and put underneath that GPS down there to hold it down. If you're using that BN 880 that we are, you probably are the BN 220. You'll probably want to make sure that that's kind of not moving around. So that's going to be super important there, that it's the BN 220. Also make sure that your harness is nicely pushed into the GPS there, otherwise it will not make a connection. So everything looks good here, and my final tips for this, honestly, before you put the top on, make sure that you use your smoke stopper set this up in beta flight and get it bound up to your radio. Make sure all your sticks are working and all that. Again, a tip for Crossfire: if you don't see anything moving, your sticks are not moving inside beta flight, switch the 2 signal wires here and make sure you double check all of your soldering here with a magnifying glass, just to make sure everything is properly done, everything looks nicely seated, and that you don't have any tabs bridging over solder one to the other, because that will cause a short. You could see a puff of white smoke come out of this flight controller or the motors. So you don't want to see that in these builds, and that's why it's so important to use a smoke stopper. If you want to check out the bottom of this video, I will have all the parts for a 10-inch build there that I recommend, as well as the motors. I'm going to recommend some Zing motors. You'll see those down there, and my top 5, or actually my top 3 10-inch frames that are available right now for building a very large 10-inch quad. So I think you'll have fun with it. Use some of the battery packs I put down below as well. Some Lion packs. They're going to be a 6S 8000 pack that I'm using, that I'm getting 25 minutes out of. That's a great pack. And various different VTXs down there as well for an analog setup and for an HD setup like this one. This one's DJI 03 with full stabilization 4K video, and really nice VTX setup on there for 1080p FPV. So super nice setup here at Primo Builds. If you guys appreciated this, please become a Patreon. And if you want to support me further and you want a 10-inch tune, be a subscriber on our Discord. I'd appreciate that. I've been working for almost 10 years giving out a lot of free information, and now we finally just kind of hoping that our subscribers will help us out in creating an archive and some support in our community for Drone Camps RC. I appreciate you, and as always, we'll keep the information coming. You can check us out right here or on our Discord, so please do subscribe. I'm Justin Davis. Take care, guys. Happy FPV, and I'll see you on the next one.